Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are back on the dev server for update 1.77 and we're having a look at the Spitfire Mk Vb. Now there are two Spitfires being added to the British tree for updates 1.77 and it's basically the untropical versions of two Spitfires we already have. The Mk Vb and the Mk Vc are getting added to the game. Now, I'm going to be concentrating mainly on the Mk Vb in this video, because the Mk Vc being at 4.7, I feel is a little bit high compared to where it should be, so talking about it in terms of battle rating and balance maybe not the best at the moment. It might be better to focus on the Spitfire Mk Vb. The Mk Vb in itself has two 20mm Hispanos mounted on the wings, and then it also has four 7.7mm Browning machine guns put on the outer bit of it. If we look at the armor of the machine, it does have dribs and drabs of it around the propeller head, at the back of the engine, the seat itself, and also slightly behind the pilot. And it also has some bulletproof glass, so there is a little bit around the place, but as always, it's really not going to help you survive that much, especially against 15mm and 20mm, which are generally the weapon of choice around this BR, even 20s creeping into it. But yeah, with four 7.7s and two 20mm, what you get is pretty much what you see on the Spitfire Mk Vb. At the same time, it's kind of interesting how one of the fuel tanks on top of it is not self-sealing, and the other one is self-sealing. I haven't personally seen another aircraft out there where it has one fuel tank which is self-sealing and another one which isn't, so that's kind of cool. But when we look at the general modifications that you want to get on the Spitfire Mk Vb, in my opinion, you should get the whole row of the rank 1, including the offensive 20mm belts and also the 7mm belts in the fuselage and the radiator, and then push on getting all of the performance upgrades as you go. Getting the Mark II year 1943 and 1942 are not that important. It's much better to get the flight performance stuff, especially at 3.7, where you can't really get away with not having that flight performance. If we talk about shells, the 20mm, what I used to use is air targets all the time, but the HEF-SAPI has taken a hit when it comes to penetration, so stealth is generally what I go for, just in case that AP round is required to do some damage. When we look at the 7.7s, I personally like the tracer belts because it's IT API, and because of that you have the penetration and also the explosivity of the incendiary round. So yeah, work on flight performance, but first don't get away from getting the offensive belts, because they will help you a lot. The default belt on the 7.7 is absolutely diabolical, and the 20mm one can be improved quite a lot. The way I would describe this aircraft is pretty much an enhanced Spitfire Mk Vb. The Mk Vb in its entirety is a good fighter at its level. It's very good at turning, it's very good at stall climbing, and it's got an incredible rate of climb on it. And the two 20mm Hispanos are there designed to be able to annihilate any enemy that you really fight. And that's pretty much the same with the Spitfire Mk Vb. What you get out of it is a more powerful engine, so you have a Spitfire Mk Vb which has a more powerful engine. This is very nice, especially if you're a beginner player. One of the first aircraft that I ever really dug my heels into, or dug my teeth into I should say, was the Spitfire Mk Vb, because it was such a friendly fighter to use in arcade and then into air realistic as well. It felt like if I made a mistake, I wasn't just going to get punished wholeheartedly for it. There would actually be some kind of way for me to correct it, instead of just losing straight off. Now, there are a lot of fighters out there which are better than this, such as, in my opinion, the Focke-Wulf 190, but it doesn't give you that ability to make that mistake, and setup is much more important. So therefore, if you are a beginner player, the Spitfire is much more friendly to you than something like a Focke-Wulf. And yeah, that just happened. One thing that I remember reading about the Spitfire Mk Vc with is the fact that they fixed the fact that you could go negative Gs in the thing without the engine absolutely annihilating itself. It seems like this is not modeled in-game yet, and I don't know whether it will be on the live server, but I hope it will be, because that is something that is obviously quite important to the plane itself, at least compared to the Mark IIB. Now, a lot of people may try and compare this to the Mark 9. The Mark 9 is just a very much upgraded version of the Mark 5. The reason why the Mark 5 struggles compared to the Mark 9, I should say, it doesn't really struggle. In real life it did struggle against stuff like Focke-Wulf 190s, but in game it won't really struggle. But the main difference is that the Mark 9 can dive. The Mark 5 and the Mark 3 are not known for their diving. These are not aircraft which are going to be able to dive very well in the game, which is something you're going to have to take into account when you face stuff like BF-109 F4s, which will be your general main competition at this BR. The F4 is an incredibly good BF-109. It has a nice mix of dive, turn, and energy retention, where the Spitfire itself struggles with the idea of diving. Energy retention, I think it beats the BF-109 at. Turning, it definitely does. But if a BF-109 pilot knows what he's doing, he can just annihilate you. So therefore, the rate of climb is incredibly important at the start. Now, luckily, around these BRs, around 3.7, you don't have those pilots, or at least you don't have them in abundance like you do in rank 4, where they will just annihilate you over and over and over again. So I think, in my opinion, this Spitfire Mk Vb, and to some extent the other one but not as much, will be another nice training fighter to get people into aerialistic. So let's say you have like a son, or you have a brother, or you have a daughter or a sister who wants to get into the game. I would always recommend going down the Spitfire line, just because it is one of the nicest to use while learning the game, starting off with the Hurricanes and then moving on to the Spitfires. You get plenty of ammo, even though it may not seem it, because the 7.7s don't do a lot, but you are able to learn that 20mm are important and you shouldn't just waste the ammo. You should only shoot when you actually have a shot and are able to hit. You also have the idea of learning about convergence of the gun, since they're so far apart, but you also have a forgiving aircraft, where if you do screw up, you aren't just dead to rights, which unfortunately some of these aircraft, such as the Focke-Wulf 190, and to a greater extent something like a P-61, definitely fall into. There is no mistake making, where with a Spitfire you have that little bit of leniency that can help you out. But the only issues with it are going to be exactly the same ones as the Spitfire Mark IIB. The fact that you are going to struggle with the dive, the fact that if you engage somebody, they are going to get away from you if they decide to. That's just something you're going to have to get used to in a plane like this. Hopefully, this is a fun aircraft to use. I am definitely going to be doing a review on it, just because it's one of those aircraft out there which I've personally been looking forward to, because I know a lot of the history behind the different Spitfire variants. Do I think it will be dominant at its BR? No, I don't think so, especially among very experienced players. But what I definitely see is an aircraft which will be fun to fly, which is something that War Thunder will always be about. But anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.